Welcome to the Engage and Empower podcast. Behind every successful company is an intentional and innovative approach to empowering your most valuable asset, your people. Join me in having conversations with people and talent leaders as we share our journeys and unpack what it takes to build strong, cohesive teams and employee experiences. From executives at early-stage startups to innovators at large public companies, we'll capture the compelling stories of the people behind people teams. Hey everyone, thanks so much for tuning in to the Engage and Empower podcast. I'm your host, Rasika Rajagopalan, and today I am really excited to be chatting with the co-founder and head of talent development at Eager Labs, Michelle Campbell. I was really lucky to meet Michelle as one of their early customers, so I'm sure we'll get into all that soon in terms of the story behind Eager Labs and what they're all about. But really at the core, my first impression of Michelle was how knowledgeable she is in coaching managers to effectively give and receive feedback, how to create a culture of growth. So Michelle, thank you so much for making time for the show. It's always such a pleasure chatting with you. If you wouldn't mind getting us started by giving listeners just a quick background and intro on you, that would be great.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here and really happy to do that. So a little bit of background on me. I've had kind of a crazy career path. I started out in undergrad where I went to the University of Illinois to train to be a pilot. And so I got my undergraduate degree in aviation human factors. And from there, I was a flight instructor for about a year where I was trying to build up my hours to get to the airlines. And as I was doing that, I realized that my values, which were being around people a lot and spending time at home with family and friends, were not reflected in the lifestyle of a pilot. And so once I started to realize that those are my values and that's really how I wanted to live my life, I realized that I had to change my career path. So from there, I ended up moving to Boston with my boyfriend at the time, now husband, and did kind of a few random things. I worked at Starbucks, and then I eventually made my way over to Harvard Business School as a faculty assistant, where I helped some faculty with their administrative tasks, their class tasks, and their research. And that's where I found organizational behavior, and I just fell in love with it. And I kind of put all my eggs in one basket and went back to grad school for it. And then from there, I was able to work at some really great places, including Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago, Allstate, Wayfair, and now Eager Labs, doing a plethora of things from leadership development programs to change management. And it's been awesome.
That's a super cool story. And it's funny because you built your career with the foundation of teaching new pilots how to fly planes. And now here you are coaching managers in the startup industry as they build planes while they're flying them. So it couldn't be more perfect. I've seen a lot of folks in this space like you take different paths. And so one of the things I'm curious about, especially as you talked about in your background, is the experience you had in getting your master's degree, especially in that organizational effectiveness space. So as you're designing new programs and as you're coaching managers, do you find yourself pulling from that experience a lot as you create these workshops, or is it more so trying things out and learning and experimenting on the job and seeing what sticks?
It's funny. I thought that most of the information that I was using and most of the skills I was using were from my master's degree program, but I actually realized that it was more of the process that I went through learning in a master's degree program that I pull on. So a lot of reflection and a lot of self-awareness and trying to increase my emotional intelligence is really a lot of the stuff that I pull on now, because that reflection helped me see where my strengths and opportunity areas are and where I can work on them going forward. And that's something that I really try to put into a lot of the leadership development programs that I create, is that ability for people to see, okay, where am I at right now? Where can I go and how can I specifically get there? And it was through my master's degree program that had a lot of different personality assessments and communication assessments and reflection exercises and really deep critical thinking that allowed me to take that and to put it into the programs that I create now.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think The first time I went through a manager development program, I expected there to be a lot more of those tactical like frameworks, and there were those things, but it did focus a lot more on the reflection, because ultimately like that's what is going to really give you the sense of where you are at and how you're showing up for your team and what types of things you want to focus on and lean into and then shift. So I think it's really interesting that even in your program too, you're kind of leaning back on a lot of that reflective work and those introspective exercises and bringing that to your programs, because I found a lot of value in that as well, both for myself and then in the programs I implement.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's becoming a little bit more widely recognized now where people understand that being a manager isn't just having these frameworks and these tools that you can use. It's also creating a sense of relationships with people and making sure that you're able to understand where they're at too and how you can help them that way, and not necessarily like, okay, how do I delegate? How do I run a one-on-one? It's also, how do I ask these questions to build a relationship where someone actually wants to tell me what they need and how I can support them and how I can be a better manager for them. So I think it's becoming more widely recognized, which is really great.
Kind of rewinding back a little bit, before you actually, even joined Eager Labs and started thinking about, co-founding this team, like what actually specifically pulled you to want to try something different from, the more structured, larger company that you were at Wayfair? Was there a particular need that you saw, or was there this desire to kind of build something of your own? What kind of led you to that?
I really wanted to grow in ways that I really wasn't able to in a larger company. I had a very specific role at Wayfair and I loved it, but I also wanted to be more consultative and I wanted to learn more about the different industries around the Boston area. And I wanted to learn how to market and do all these different things. And when the opportunity presented itself to join such a fresh new startup where I would be experimenting every day and working with people to create products and working with clients to see what they needed from us, that was just really exciting for me to be able to learn all these different areas and to put that into one role. And it was constantly evolving. And also, I didn't really think that I was good at experimentation and I was good at just kind of rolling with the punches and a high volume of change, but it actually ended up suiting me really well. So I was really happy that I was able to jump into something that I was nervous about doing because I didn't have the confidence in it. And then just through trial and error, like you talked about earlier, got used to it and really kind of thrived in that environment.
Right, right. It's crazy what you can unlock when you push your own comfort zone. And that's something that I'm sure a lot of managers see, even with their teams and their direct reports, how much they can unlock when they empower and, enable their teams to kind of push their own comfort zone and step out of, the tight knit framework of the bullet points that are their job. So I think that's really cool. As you were starting, Eager Labs and the various programs that, you all offer, what were some key philosophies, theories, maybe practices that you picked up along the way that you leveraged as you designed this program? And what does Eager Labs look like today?
Yeah, it looks very different than what it was when I first started. So when I joined, it was basically all about 360 feedback and getting people the information that they needed on where they were at the time and then how they could get there. So we would go into companies, we would run 360 feedback processes with our own platform and our own questions and competencies and things like that. And then we would coach managers on how to lead their people through their 360 reports and then how to continue to help them grow and develop past that point of that just one conversation where you talked through the 360 report. We found though that it was really a cultural thing. Like the companies really had to be very invested in that and they needed to set aside time for growth and stretch opportunities for their people in order for this to be a successful process. And a lot of the companies we were working for were smaller startups as well, who really had a hard time finding the time to do that. So as we talked and as we continued to experiment with our product, we realized where do people grow the most? They grow the most in these one-on-one conversations with their managers, with these brainstorming sessions where they're given a stretch project or they're put on a new task that is brand new to them. And those are the areas that they're able to grow and develop in more. So how do we train managers to get their people to the highest level and to continue to grow and support their people through it? And we realized that that was creating a management training solution for them, where we could tell them, okay, here's how you can get the most out of your people. Here's how you can continue to grow and evolve them, and how you yourself can be a successful manager through that as well. So now we focus again a lot on the trust building aspect of it, so that you know exactly how your people want to grow and where they want to grow in, and you can delegate tasks and projects and stretch opportunities to them in a way that fits what they want to do, and in a way that will actually effectively help them grow, and then providing them the feedback that they need to understand what they're doing well, what they can continue to be working on, and just like that whole evolution of having your people or seeing your people and creating that, building those relationships and helping them to reach their highest potential.
Yeah.
A big thing that we really try to do with helping them build trust with their people is teaching them how to ask open-ended questions of their people. How are you doing? What's on your plate right now? What are you struggling with? How can I support you? So that people are forced to give longer answers instead of, do you need my help? And I know for me, I would always say, no, it's okay, because I didn't want people to think that I wasn't able to do my job or that I was struggling. So now we force them to be more vulnerable with their, well, not force, but we encourage them to be more vulnerable with their people, so that their people are also open and honest with them, and they can build those relationships continually, whether it's face-to-face or over a webcam.
Yeah, yeah. I think those open-ended questions are so important, because that is what I feel like we're organically lacking right now. Whereas, before, when you go to the kitchen and you're heating up your lunch or whatever, and you run into someone, you say, hey, how are you? It's not like, hey, how are you? Great. Okay, now we're going to dive into whatever we scheduled this meeting for. It's a lot more organic, and you're really like getting to know people. And in the world that we live in now, which just back-to-back meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting, if you don't really take the time to, or like intentionally work those questions in there and show that authentic curiosity around, that person, especially like if they're new and you met them in that sort of distributed world, then, you lose on that opportunity to cultivate that trust and that psych safety. So I love that you're kind of employing a lot of the strategies that you're, coaching your managers around in your program. That's really cool.
Yeah, that's such a great point too about authentic connection. And we really push the participants to not just make their meetings all about status and decision making, but also to give that space for maybe brainstorming or checking in and seeing how people are doing, and just going with the flow and going with the conversation. So maybe you have one-on-ones where that status check-in or decision making prioritization, whatever it needs to be, would be the majority of it, but then maybe you should just have another weekly check-in just to see how people are doing. That's what we've implemented since we've been a remote company, is 3 times a week we just have really quick check-ins at like the same time. And it's become a space now where we're so comfortable with each other that we're just like, hey, having kind of a junky day, getting this and this and this done, but it's also really dreary here, and I'm just, kind of tired, and blah, blah, blah. And so we've gotten to that place because we've checked in so many times where we're comfortable with each other and we're very open. And it's just creating those spaces and being intentional about having that time, setting that time aside, has been really helpful for us. And it's something that we encourage our people to do too.
Sure. Yeah. And I like your point about brainstorming. It's not always just about, hey, how are you? And like, let's talk about our weekend. Sometimes like the best ways to build connection are to get into that creative space where you're bouncing ideas off of each other. One thing leads to the next. And those are the meetings where you feel like really energized. Sometimes you leave, and then that adds a different layer, different flavor to a lot of the tactical work that you're doing. Like you got to that place together. and recreating that feeling from when you were in the office to, how we're all kind of logging in now. I think the brainstorming piece is a big part of that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's a time where you feel as an employee really heard by your manager, and you feel like your thoughts and ideas are equal, like on an equal level. And so just to use your brain and be creative that way, and to have that connection with your manager where you can bounce ideas off each other and build something great together. I think it's a great time. Not only are you working on your critical thinking skills, but you're really just growing in your technical abilities too. Like that's pretty much how I learned on the job, was by having specific brainstorming and structuring sessions with my bosses, where we'd say, okay, we've got this project, and together we would sit down and we would say, all right, what can we do here? And we would brainstorm together, and then we'd come up with a structure, and I'd go and I'd run with it. But I had their input, I had my ideas, and it just really does, like you said, empower you to feel like, okay, I'm capable of this. I can do this. I'm on the same level as them. We're working as a team now, instead of feeling like there's a strict hierarchy.
I think you make a really interesting point that, 360s are great because they do give you a forum to gather feedback and really think through it, but really they're just a vehicle to that culture of feedback exchange. And for a lot of companies, that's the first thing, people decide, we're going to build a performance management program. We want to leverage 360s. It is very time intensive. And unless you are able to really devote the time, then, you're not going to get the full potential out of that process and out of that practice. And so I think kind of shifting gears to really thinking about, okay, how do we maximize what we have in these one-on-one conversations with your managers, which are really impactful because at the core, like they are still sort of gathering feedback from the rest of the team and are able to kind of share that with you, and you build that relationship and that rapport. And so I think there's a lot that you can get out of that. So that shift is really interesting. As you're coaching managers through this program, we talked a little bit earlier about psych safety and cultivating it with the team. How do you coach your leaders to provide feedback, especially in this distributed world that we're in a way that builds up employees rather than in a way that threatens their psych safety? Because, it is a little bit more impersonal, I'm sure, over, a virtual call than it is in person. Every meeting kind of needs to be planned to a certain degree. There are less off the cuff conversations. So how do you equip managers with the skill set to go into those conversations and still sort of build upon that psych safety rather than threaten it?
That is a very good point, and such a great question, because I feel like I could talk for days on feedback, because it's been so buzzy over the last couple of years with radical candor, and just the fact that people are like, oh, we have to be creating a feedback culture, and we need to be giving feedback all the time. And it became this very intense thing. And then I think because people felt this urgent need to give feedback, it wasn't provided in a way that was supportive and helpful, and kept people feeling like their manager really cared about them and wasn't just nitpicking at them everywhere. So we have a couple things that we teach that we think are helpful frameworks, and also just general things to keep in mind when you're giving feedback. So big thing that we teach is the SBI model, so the Situation Behavior Impact Model, and that's from the Center for Creative Leadership. And we try to get people to be as specific as they possibly can in their feedback, so they can try to take their biases and their subjectivity out of it as much as possible, because it really is very easy to give feedback to somebody about the way that you would have done something, and not necessarily on the way that would have been maybe made them more impactful or made it a little bit more helpful. So we're constantly telling people, identify the situation. What was the specific behavior that you saw that anybody else who was sitting in that room could see too? And then what was the impact of that behavior? And we try to get them to also give an action item at the end of that. So whether that's telling them what they can do better next time, or whether it's asking a question like, okay, what do you think we can do to build or to fix this next time, or to change the outcome of this next time, and coach them a little bit more on that. That's something that we really try to push as much as possible, so that they're not just getting this feedback, but they also know what to do with it. They know how to change and how to improve the next time that this might come up. it has to be something that is also timely. The problem that we were seeing a lot of times with the 360 feedback is people were hoarding feedback. They wouldn't give it until there was a process in place where they could just let it all out in a report. And people had a hard time going back to that time when the feedback was written, thinking, why did I do it that way? And I don't do that anymore. Is this even valid anymore? And so we try to say, as timely as you can be to give this feedback to people, that would be great. And I think the biggest thing that we try to put into people's brains, minds when they're thinking about getting feedback is that you can't just give negative feedback. You have to give positive feedback too. And that's just not just praise, like, hey, good job. That's something that has to be like, this was really great because. And so you follow the SBIA model with positive feedback too. When you spoke in the meeting that we had yesterday, you were very clear and concise, and people were very engaged, and they knew exactly what they needed to do going forward. That was awesome. Keep that up. And so then people know what they need to work on, and they're not focusing on that anymore and then wondering, did I do that well? Did I not? They know that that's a great thing. They're going to continue to do that behavior over and over again. It's not something that they need to waste precious brain space wondering if they're doing it well or not. So we're constantly trying to get people to give that positive feedback so that when something does come up that is more constructive, it doesn't feel like you're always just nitpicking or constantly giving this constructive feedback and not balancing it well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think lately I have seen more and more people kind of lean into giving more specific feedback, especially on the negative. There are all these things that you learn around, how to have a tough conversation, but less so on the positive, which I think is, equally, if not more important, because it's so easy to take something that, somebody responded well to and then continue to replicate that behavior. That's the easiest thing to do. And so it's so impactful to be able to share specifically, like, this is why I loved the thing that you did. And those are the types of validations that you get less of virtually, because before maybe you spoke at a meeting, after the meeting, someone's like, hey, like, great job. I really loved when you said this. And now you have to go out of your way to open up Slack and ping that person. And, it just feels different. And so I think that goes a long way. I've heard of the 5-to-1 ratio. I don't know if that's something that you also employ in your workshops, but is that the magic number?
There's 5-to-1, and then it became 6-to-1, and then 7-to-1. So it's like, it keeps changing, but essentially it's like, yeah, that would be any sort of positive feedback that you can give, you should be giving. And so it should be at a higher ratio than your constructive feedback. I mean, you'll always have those situations where you have people who might not be living up to their full potential in a role, might be a bad fit. And so then that takes a different turn. But I don't think that we should enter into a manager direct report relationship of assuming that they are there already and just focusing on that constructive feedback. And I had a mentor once who told me this really great analogy for feedback that I try to give during our sessions too, which is your person's performance is basically a car on the road. And when they start to have issues, the car starts to veer off the road, right? So your job as a manager is to help them get back to going straight onto the road, or get them back from actually veering off the road. If you don't, eventually what's going to happen is they're going to veer off the road and they're going to hit a ditch, and it's going to be harder to get them out of that ditch and get them back on the road. That's why that constant constructive feedback is really helpful. But at the same time, to help them go faster and help them stay in the lane better, that positive feedback is what's really going to get them to go faster and to get to where they need to go quicker and more effectively. So you need to be giving that positive feedback to get people to be more productive and effective. And you should only be giving the constructive when they're really like starting to go off the road. And I think a lot of people are thinking, okay, I have to give feedback, and they immediately go to the negative or what somebody can change, but it can absolutely be positive instead.
Right. I think that ratio is good too, because everybody has a different balance of maybe how self-critical they are or how self-aware that they are around the ways that they maybe communicate or problem solve or whatever it is. And so giving your direct report everything enables you to kind of set them up to be successful in all of the areas that they may have a great understanding of where they're at and areas where, they are looking to you for more guidance. I love the point that you made earlier about 360s. They're a great tool, but a lot of times people do kind of save up everything that they want to share, especially at the peer-to-peer level for that process. They're like, okay, we have this 360. I have, all these different things I want to share to this person that I work with that's not my direct report. I'll save it up for this process. So thinking back through all the advice you've kind of given around building psych safety when giving feedback, how does that apply to peer-to-peer feedback? Would you suggest employing the exact same strategies, or are there any caveats or any additional pieces of guidance that you have there, especially as we're virtual?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. I think peer-to-peer feedback is definitely a little bit of a different beast, because when you're a manager, part of your job is to support and grow your people. So it might not come more naturally, but it's just something where you're like, okay, this is part of my job.
It's expected.
Exactly. And then as a peer, a lot of times you're not giving feedback unless it is something that is not going well and you need an intervention, or you need, to try to help that person work a little bit better, to be more effective, to work with you as a peer. And so and then you might have the 360s where it's all of a sudden everyone has to give feedback on each other, and you're like, well, I don't know. I don't know what to say. I don't want to upset anybody. So it's really hard. But the thing that I've always leaned on is trying to do the same thing that I do as a manager, and just leaning on the things that this person is doing that's really impactful and really helpful, especially to me if they're a peer. So what have they been doing that's been super, super helpful for me? How have they made my job easier? How have they worked with me that's made it really enjoyable and made us really effective working partners together? And if something is really, again, going off the rails, going off the tracks, and we cannot work effectively together, then I think it's time to have that conversation of, hey, can we talk about ways that we can work a little bit more effectively together? And that's a tip that I give most of my managers, is if things aren't working between you and a direct report, or you and a peer, and you need to reset how you work together and try to find better ways to do so, asking that open-ended question of how can we work more effectively together is great, because you're not saying like, hey, you do this, 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 and this, and it sucks. You're saying, okay, how can we make this a better working relationship? And sometimes people really don't have that self-awareness to understand that things aren't going well. And so you have to, you have to be more direct, and that's totally fine. You can use the SBIA model for that. But a lot of times people will feel that tension already, and they'll know that things aren't working. And so that you can get their perspective and see how they're thinking about a certain situation, instead of just assuming the way that they should be working and the way that they should be changing it. And I think that coming in from that direction to a peer, and when you're having one of those more difficult conversations or constructive feedback type of conversations, is a lot better than just assuming what they're doing wrong and why they're doing specific things that aren't working for you.
Yeah, there are two things in there that you said that I really like. One being, especially as a peer, there's less of an expectation that, this person's going to be getting feedback from you. So it's even more important to really build that trust through a lot of the affirmative and positive feedback that you're giving. And so that person does understand that you have their best interests in mind, that you're noticing all of the great things that they're doing. And so you're almost like building that bank, so that in the future, if there is something that you do want to talk about that is, a little bit more constructive, you have that relationship and that history of exchanging that feedback. The other thing too being, when you are working with a peer and you do want to talk about something that's tough, if you aren't their manager, you don't have the same level of knowledge around what other things are going on, like what other projects are they working on, what other sort of challenges do they have on their plate. And so really going into it, especially saying, like, how can we work more effectively together, and opening that door for them to give you more information is super critical, because, you really can't assume that you know everything about their situation.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And if there's anything that I've learned over the coaching that we've done through our program and working with different companies, it's that whenever you can test your assumptions in a conversation, that's what is going to bring about the best decisions and the best conclusions. So you have a night, if you're thinking that somebody is doing something for a specific reason, but you don't know that that's a fact, that's an assumption and you need to test it. And the way you can do that is just by asking open-ended questions. Hey, can you walk me through how you got to that conclusion? Or, can we talk about how we can work more effectively together again? Just making, or, how are you doing what's on your plate and seeing what's going on so that you can really understand where they're operating from and what their thought process is, and you're not just making assumptions and then acting on those along the way and possibly ruining relationships.
I read a book on negotiation, and that's obviously a very different topic than what we're talking about. But one of the points in there is that when you go into a conversation, those that are really doing their best to collaborate expect that they're going to learn something that they didn't really have knowledge of before. But the people that, are really like at the top of their game go in and like actively try to find that. They go in and they're like, I'm definitely going to find something I don't know. How do I uncover that? And then understand how I can come into this relationship and collaborate most effectively. So you really have to go in with that mindset.
Yes. And I love that, not even for peer-to-peer interactions, but for manager to direct report actions. Like, as a manager, you should always be thinking, okay, I made this hire, or this person's on my team and they have a different skill set than me. They have different experiences. They have different technical knowledge than I do. So what can I learn from them? And I remember vividly being in an internship at Allstate and having the consultants that I've been working with who were older than me, far more experienced, had come from very, very high-end consulting firms, ask me what my thoughts were on something. And I was like, me? I'm still in grad school. I don't know. I've never done this before. And they're like, yeah, but you're right there with the learning and what's going on right now in the field. So you have a totally different perspective than we do. And we want to hear what your thought process is. And the humility that they showed me with those actions really rang true for me. And I noticed that the best managers that I've had and the best ones I've worked with are always actively listening to their people and actively seeking out their thoughts and their opinions and using them and kind of breaking down the hierarchy a little bit to work together as a team. And it's awesome. I think that goes a long way with any relationship that you have.
Yeah. Especially in the startup industry where a lot of us are doing things for the very first time. None of us have really had experience doing any, one or two given things that we do every day. So I think approaching it with that open mind totally makes sense. So we've talked a lot about feedback. Are there other sort of critical skills or topics that you like to touch on in the programs that you design? Anything you find super impactful or just really applicable to, companies and managers across all teams and sizes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the biggest one is the one that we touched on before with the psychological safety and trust. I think creating that foundation is really important. So we talk a lot about that to start off with. A big thing too that we really lean into is authentic leadership, because a lot of people enter into a leadership or a management role thinking that they should be operating one way because that's what they've seen other people in their careers act like or behave like, or they've seen it in, just culture on TV, movies, books, things like that. So they think that a manager is this specific type of person who acts a certain way. But really the best managers are the ones that act from their values and their strengths. So we really harp on that and try to help people identify that as well. And the big thing that we've brought into that is a part of my graduate school learning is leading through change. And that I think is more applicable than ever right now. And it's been really helpful to give people a change framework and help them see what individuals go through when they're faced with a change and how not every person deals with change the same way, and how can you bring them through this change in a way that is effective and supportive and will actually help them eventually become productive again and come out the other side without too many bumps and bruises.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Change is ever constant, more so now than ever. I think both on, the managers, the work environment that we're all in today, as well as like what we're working on for the business and, what your sort of milestones and goals are as a team, as a company, as an employee, lots of pivots. And so on that topic of change, I'm sure starting your own company was no easy task, big change for you. So how did you maintain that resilience and, how did you stay motivated as you navigated each hurdle? Were there any particularly challenging moments, or you really just kind of took each change as an opportunity and kept looking forward? Like, what was that experience like?
Yeah, that's that's a really great question. Looking back, I think at first when I joined the company, I really didn't know what I was doing, and that was kind of helpful because I just kind of jumped in and tried to figure out, how could I help and how could I become part of this team and actually get us off the ground, get us a product, and move forward. And then the people on my team are so supportive and so open minded when it comes to experimentation and failure and learning from failure that I quickly got over my fear of failure and my perfectionist tendencies and was able to kind of roll with the punches a little bit easier. So I think creating that type of an environment where you hear people's ideas, you say, that sounds great, let's make that into this experiment and let's try it out and see what happens. It's very empowering, and it teaches you how to fail safely and then how to learn from it and to move forward. So that was a big change for me personally. As we've navigated the different products and services that we've provided, my team members have been so open and supportive with things that haven't worked and things that we are trying to build up to create better services. And I think that support has made it so that even when we were struggling, it didn't feel like we were struggling because we were always thinking, okay, what's the next thing we can do? How can we learn from this? What is something that we can move forward, take from this and move forward and build from it? And so I think honestly that I can't find any times where I was really upset or frustrated thinking, is this going to work? Because we didn't know. And so we just came into it, we were like, let's just try it out and see what happens. But we were all on the same page with that type of a mindset. So I think it's really important for anyone who's in a startup or trying to join a startup to make sure that the type of environment that you are creating or that you're a part of, because it's always going to be tough. You're always going to hit things that don't work and have to pivot. And if people have large reactions to that and stress out, that just brings everybody down and it demotivates immediately and scares people, because it is a gamble when you're in a startup. You don't know what's going to work or if it's going to work. And so really that environment is so key to being able to pivot quickly and hopefully create something that is long lasting.
Yeah, it's so cool to hear you say that, because it's almost as if, it is that you've employed a lot of the strategies that you're sharing with managers in these larger companies in the way that, the company is being run even in its initial stages, and like enabling that ability to fail safely and to innovate. And it almost reminds me of just the importance of investing in this type of leadership development and in, a people team or whatever that looks like for your organization early, because it can make such a difference, even in your experience, in that ability to feel motivated rather than frustrated, and in a place where you feel like you're giving up, even in the most dynamic of challenges that is starting your own company.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I've learned is that managers really do hold the power for their people to be productive and engaged and to learn and to grow. And it's not necessarily the other things that you're putting into the company. I think if you put a lot of effort into training your managers to be supportive and to help their people, that you're just going to reap so many benefits from that.
Yeah, totally. Well, one last question I have for you before we wrap. I know you pull together and you facilitate so many different trainings, workshops, and you have a wealth of knowledge in the learning and development and people space. Is there anywhere you go or anyone in particular that you find yourself continuing to learn from, or any practice that you do to continue to, focus on your own learning and development as a leader?
Yeah. So someone that I love, that I'm sure everybody else loves too, is Brene Brown. She's like modern day Oprah. She's amazing. Been really into her Dare to Lead book is great. It's really strengthened my understanding of creating a psychologically safe space, creating trust with people through that openness and vulnerability. And her 2 podcasts have been so insightful. And I've used different examples that she's given during those podcasts. She's got the Dare to Lead podcast now, and she has Unlocking Us, and both of them just have really great anecdotes and examples of how to be a great leader and how to be somebody who is humble and open and really supportive of others. So she's been really great. And then I think the 2 people who have really changed my thought process on what developing people should look like is Teresa Amabile is the first one. She actually she's a professor at Harvard Business School, and she wrote The Progress Principle, and her work was what really was the catalyst for me to go back to school. And she basically says that as you feel progress while doing meaningful work, you are going to feel like you are growing, and you're going to feel engaged, and you're going to feel empowered. And then, as we know from like all the Gallup research, that just increases productivity too. So that feeling of progress as a manager, if you can create that for your people, that feeling of growth and progress is going to help them continue to be engaged and motivated to do the work that they want to do. And so her stuff has been really great to read. And then Gretchen Rubin is a really great author who also talks about, she's got a book called The Happiness Project, and she essentially came to the same conclusion through all of her research, that feeling of growth is something that really drives people. And so I'm constantly telling managers, however you can grow your people, however you can have them feel like they're making some sort of difference or some sort of progress in their own personal and professional lives, do that, because that's really what gets them engaged and what brings the best out of them. So the 2 of them have been really integral in the approach I take to learning and development.
Nice. Those are some great recommendations. Yeah, great. Well, Michelle, I really appreciate you taking time to come on the show. It's always really inspiring to hear other HR leaders take the leap to co-found their own ventures and learn more about how they navigated those challenges. And it's also great to hear your advice on, a lot of these distributed learning and development programs and how we can equip, managers with the skill set of leading their teams and cultivating that sense of psych safety and building that culture of feedback. So awesome to hear your thoughts on that. It's always really fun chatting with you. So thanks for sharing your story and your experiences and being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. This was an awesome conversation. I really appreciate it.
Oh, of course. And to anyone that is looking for, ongoing leadership development for their managers, be sure to check out Eager Labs. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to hear more stories like this, please subscribe for the weekly drop and feel free to share around with your people and talent colleagues. I'd love your feedback, so please leave a review and let us know what you enjoyed and what types of topics you'd like to see covered in the future. The more reviews and subscribers we get, the more quality content we can consistently deliver to you. If you're interested in being on the podcast, feel free to reach out to me at russica@engageandempower.org. See you next week.